This is a DrumWise Meets, and today I'm here with a drummer who's worked with the likes of Brian Ferry, Katie Tunstall, Joe Strummer and Reef. I'm here with Luke Bullen. Hi Luke.
Hey Tom, how you doing?
What age did you get into drums, and when you first started playing, what bands or artists inspired you?
I started having drum lessons as soon as I went to high school, so when I was 12. But before that, it was the kind of typical story of pots and pans, and there was like I had a bunch of mates, and one of them had a drum, and when we tried to kind of put a band together, I just naturally gravitated towards that. So I was always tapping into rhythm, but it wasn't until when I was 12 and got to high school that I actually started having lessons. And at that early stage, it was top 40 stuff, you know, gravitating towards rock and pop, you know, like Bon Jovi, Bryan Adams, those kind of things at that time. And then, you know, once that was influencing me right at the beginning, and then as my taste expanded, you know, I sort of got into blues and things like U2 and you know, other artists. But yeah, very early on, it was the top 40 radio that I wanted to emulate.
Cool, good stuff. What was your first drum kit?
Oh, my first drum kit I sold, and I'm gutted to it to this day. My mum and dad, after I'd had lessons for about a year, and they were waiting to see if it was a fad, if it was something that was just going to pass me by. But I stuck with the lessons at school, and I'd come home and practice on a pillow on a pad or something like that. So for that, the following Christmas, they bought me a drum kit, which, you know, absolutely amazing. And it was this beautiful Rogers kit, US Rogers kit, and it was gorgeous, but it was just 3 drums. And I wanted, you know, that after a while of playing that, I wanted a rack of drums. Do you know what I mean? So I got rid of that. And actually, you've interviewed him, Steve Barney, who also grew up in Norwich. That's how I met him. He was advertising a drum kit that was very much of the sort of Phil Collins kind of. There was like 3 concert toms and a floor tom. So I went and saw Steve, met Steve for the first time and his dad. And with the money from selling my Rogers kit, like I say, I regret that to the day, I then bought that kit off Steve Barney, and that's kind of started that off.
I see. Oh, okay, cool. Obviously, I normally ask at this point, do you still have it? But you've already said, regretfully.
Yeah.
That would probably be worth quite a bit now.
Yeah. All right, don't rub it in.
We've all got, you know, gear that we sold that we regret big time. You know, it's one of those things, isn't it? That's why now I try and hold on to everything I can.
Yeah.
So, while we're talking about equipment, what equipment do you currently use? You know, when you're either out on the road or in your studio, is it the same stuff? Have you got different setups?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to have been endorsed by Premier since the early 2000s. It was when Katie's career was just taking off, and a tour manager that was with us at that time knew George Fredericks, who's now with Natal, but at that point he's with Premier. So our tour manager got in touch with George because he'd worked with him before and said, you know, we think these guys are going to go somewhere. You know, are you interested in endorsing the league? And at that point, you know, I didn't really have a name, and I think George was like edging his bets a little bit, not knowing what was going to happen. And he said, I can't offer anything at the moment, but I've got this drum kit in the corner of my office that if it works, Luke's very welcome to. And it was the right sizes, the sizes I would have requested, and the color. So it was 22, 12, 14 floor, 16 floor in red sparkle, artist series, elite series. And I've still got it to this day. So that's my touring kit, and it gets commented on and how great it sounds, and it's never let me down. It sounds fantastic. So that's permanently in flight cases and is currently in Brian Ferry's lockup. And like I said, I've been using that for nearly 20 years now. But in my studio, I'm a big fan of vintage drums. So I've got various vintage drums here in my studio at the moment, and I like sort of switching between them, different sounds, and yeah, and just that passion for that. I like the history of a drum kit, you know, like thinking who's played this, what music has it been involved in, what gigs has it done, what you know, what recording sessions might it have been on, and I like being part of that journey of a musical instrument. And at some point I will sell these, you know, hopefully in a long, you know, in a long time away. But it's just nice being part of, you know, I'm sitting in front of a Ludwig here that's from 1970, so it's 50 years old, you know, and that's been through, I don't know what really, but I'm part of its story, and I'll pass it on at some point to someone else, and hopefully it'll continue.
Awesome. I've got a Ludwig Pioneer up on my shelf up there, and it's roughly 1930, and it's got this massive dent. Well, to me, it's massive. It's only this, but dent in the side by the strainer. And like, where did that come from? Like, I want to know the history, but I'm never going to know the history of that drum. But it's just so cool, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, this question's been hard for quite a few people. Others, bang, they've got the answer immediately. So, like you mentioned Steve earlier, I think he had his answer right there, and you've already mentioned who it was already today. But if you had to pick just one, who would be your all-time favourite drummer?
Steve Gadd, without a doubt. He's not. Going back to my early influences, it was seeing Larry Mullen playing with U2 that really opened things up for me, because I like to say up until that point I've been into a lot of top 40 stuff, you know, pop rock records, and then seeing Larry Mullen, it was at Live Aid actually in 1985, and he was doing things with you know, snare drums with the snare off. So he's sort of getting away from that backbeat thing and just playing toms, and that really opened my mind to a different way of playing drums. But I think once I discovered Steve Gadd, I'm trying to think, you know, I'd have heard him on, I would unknowingly heard him like on Paul Simon records and all the great recordings. But it was like at one point he was presented to me by a fellow drummer, someone else who was studying, or a teacher or something like that. And it was like, wow. And to this day, he's the guy that just still blows me away, because he's got technique and feel, you know, and I admire the technicians. But it's not what I gravitate towards. I gravitate towards the more the groove, song orientated players. But Steve Gadd has just got it all, and he just the positioning of his notes. He can play the simplest thing, and you can almost recognise him just because of what he, you know, the bits he isn't playing. You know, where that snare drum falls, that accent on the bass drum, and it's just, and to have that kind of identity through your sound as a drummer is really impressive, I think, you know, and still think to this day, and I don't think he's been surpassed.
Yeah, and actually this has already been mentioned in an interview, but that fill in the middle of Chuck E's In Love, Ricky Lee Jones, I mean, it's just, you know,
everyone remembers the first time they heard that and their jaw just hitting the floor, because it was just like the perfect thing in the perfect place, perfectly executed, and it's
even down to the very first note you hear him playing that song, that drum, when it comes in.
Just, exactly.
Beautiful.
But he as well as being a technician, he's one of those musicians where it's coming from his heart and not from his head. And I think that really attracts me to him as well. You know, like you can see it, even if he's doing a clinic or something, his eyes will shut, his head might go back. You know, he's in the moment. He's making music. He's not just playing notes. He's playing a musical piece, whatever that might be. And I think that there's a little bit of him in everything that he plays. You know, and that, I think that I've always gravitated towards that. The list below him is endless. Do you know what I mean? But I think if I had to choose one, he always comes to the top, because he's a phenomenal musician.
And what you said there, I think, is really important these days. And this is not me, having a go at Instagram drummers or anything at all, because I think that's a great thing in the day and age we live in. But yeah, I do think a lot of, I teach a lot of people, and I think a lot of kids come into lessons or whatever, and it's all about the chops and yeah, what you just said is great. Like, they forget that it's a musical instrument, and it's about that, just shutting your eyes and just like playing what feels right, rather than, how many 30-second notes can I fit in this bar?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you mentioned other drummers there. So if you were to give us a few other names of influences, who would those other people be?
Well, like I say, Larry Mullen's up there because he was such an early influence and just opened my mind. But I love a lot of the classic British drummers. Charlie Watts is up there because, again, he's so identifiable, and that, like him, and obviously Ringo, and a little bit later John Bonham and that sort of thing. They were inventing all this. I know there was a heritage behind them, all the classic jazz drummers, but when it came to those, pop and rock hadn't existed in the way that existed when those guys came to the fore. So they would, they were doing things that hadn't ever been done, and we can look back and listen to it and think it quite technically quite simple, but at the time, recording techniques and the quality of the instrumentation and that the instruments, they were defining pretty much everything that's followed in the last 60 years, and that's astonishing. But Charlie's feel, I think, is just amazing. It's just incredible. That I love drummers, although this doesn't apply to Steve Gadd. I love drummers where it can feel like it could fall apart. That you can't see, you hit, because we're conditioned now to hear music, and a lot of it's gridded because of modern recording techniques. And you can almost, when you listen to a modern song, you can almost hear the grid. That doesn't exist with Charlie Watts or the likes of him. Do you know what I mean? And it's the moments where his snare falls a bit late, or there's that song, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, where he comes in the wrong way round and then switches it after a beat, and they leave it. And it's like, that's the bit I love in that song now. And it was possibly, I don't know for sure, it was possibly a mistake, and he corrected it, So Charlie Watts, Ringo Starr, John Bonham, Keith Moon, those guys. But then sort of moving on a little bit, who else have I been influenced by? I said my list is endless, and now my mind's gone blank. Levenhelm, absolutely fantastic drummer. Max Roach, Papa Joe Jones, Billy Cobham. I'm fascinated by his style and power. He's not someone that I've always gone to, but when I've listened to him, it's always blown me away. More recently, Jay Belrose, I really like him. He did the Raising Sands album with Alison Krauss and Robert Plant. He's brilliant. And the first time I saw him, he was playing with Beck, and got to meet him. Steve Jordan, another groove player. More closer to home, Neil Wilkinson has always been a massive inspiration, what he played. And Jeremy Stacey. I think that's enough right now.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. And well, that just goes to show, doesn't it, that the whole point of that question is, I've asked you for one, but it's pretty impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Depends on the day.
Yeah, it does. And we're influenced by so many people over our lives and careers that, yeah, as you say, it depends on the day. And what you said there, someone sent me a link the other day to a couple of John Bonham tracks that had been quantized. So they put them, on the grid and like manually moved them so they were on the grid. And the difference in, his actual playing and then the quantized thing, it wasn't as far apart as I would have thought it would have been, to be honest. But in terms of, as you said earlier, like playing from the heart and feeling, yeah, when it was quantized to the grid, it did not have that same feeling at all. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, last year I had to learn Stairway to Heaven, and for an audition, and it had been years since I'd studied it, and it was just amazing how the sections moved. You know, they would come out of that middle section back into the verse, and it would slow down, but you didn't feel the song slow down. You felt the energy of the song shift, but it didn't feel like the song, like the drummer. It didn't sound like the drummer slowed down. This, you know, that all that stuff fascinates me. How that all exists and happens and sounds amazing, and it's the bit that you connect with. But technically, it's wrong. You know, wrong.
Mm.
Or what we've led to be, you know, believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but then it sounds good.
Yeah, it's music. That's
Exactly.
where the music lies. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's what I say to students all the time. It's an art form, so what one person thinks is great, someone else is going to hate. So you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So possibly another difficult question here. What's been the highlight of your career so far?
No, not a difficult question at all. The highlight of my career, I think 2 or 3 years ago now, must have been 3 years ago now, I played the Royal Albert Hall for the first time with my parents in the audience. And when I was 14, so I've been playing drums probably for a couple of years, I grew up in Norwich, and in the local paper, someone was selling 2 tickets to an Eric Clapton gig at Royal Albert Hall. And yeah, my dad had been a fan of Eric Clapton, you know, Cream and that sort of thing, and we'd listened to records, and those tickets appeared, and I sort of, you know, went to him and my mum and said, you know, I'd love to go. So they, you know, they forked out the money, bought these 2 tickets, and Dad drove me down to the Royal Albert Hall, and we watched Eric Clapton play, and it was Phil Collins on drums that night. So that was really special. Another guy that would be on the list. With Nathan East on bass. So it was a brilliant rhythm section, and just, you know, I'd gone to pub gigs in Norwich and seen things on the TV, but to step into the Royal Albert Hall for the first time at 14 and see that show was just so memorable. And it was such a defining moment in sort of kind of moving me towards what I wanted to do as a career. So so that stayed with me. So then 30 odd years later, to then play in that room with my mum and dad in the audience was a huge highlight, because it just felt like coming full circle. You know, they'd encouraged this spark of interest and passion and love for what you know, the drums, and encouraged me the whole way. So then to play on the stage where they you know, that all kicked off in front of them was a brilliant moment. But then another one that kind of sits almost as close was with Brian Ferry playing the Hollywood Bowl in LA with an orchestra, it was like 70 piece orchestra, and that was like flying the Starship Enterprise at Star Trek, because I was in the middle of the stage, and there's 10 of us in the band anyway, so the band was set up normally. But behind me, directly behind me, was the conductor watching me for obviously intros and outros and endings and that sort of thing. And then beyond him, 70 people playing in front of, you know, playing in the Hollywood Bowl, you know, Los Angeles in the summertime. And the whole year, we'd started that campaign, that touring schedule in February, and that gig came at the end of August. So the whole year, as we were developing songs and changing arrangements, those recordings would go back to London, and the string arranger, who were writing the parts for the orchestra for that gig, that was going on all year. So the whole thing was building up. There was, you know, several months building up to this one show, where we only had one run through at soundcheck with the band, with the orchestra, and then it was the gig. And to walk on that stage knowing that we only had one shot to get it right, just the adrenaline and the fear, and it was just you know, almost overwhelming. And every song, it's like, right, we nailed that, let's get through this next one, kind of thing. And just that feeling of, you know, I could sense if there was a big ending and then a crash, And I could, you know, like, I had to actually, it wasn't that I could see in my peripheral vision. I had 2 monitors where I could see the conductor. So as I came to finish the song with the last crash of the song, I could see him conducting the orchestra. So 70, 80 musicians all following my downstroke and ending the tune. It's just this sort of overwhelming sense of power.
Yeah, I mean, that's the pressure's really on there. So if the orchestra is following you on your drums, you are the ultimate timekeeper there. Then the director,
you know, and counting it all in, and yeah. So, but then what was great, we had, like I say, it was that there was a lot of anxiety prior to the show because there'd been such a big build up, and then that sense as we were playing, this is going well, this sounds amazing. And then getting to the end of the last tune, knowing that we hadn't made any mistakes, that it had gone really well, that we, you know, everyone was just vibing on it. And I, you know, stood up to take the applause and turned round to see the conductor, and he just reached over and fist bumped me, and it's like, yeah. We nailed it. So that was pretty special.
It sounds it. That's great. And you mentioned, you know, not messing any of the songs up, from career highlights to possibly the opposite here. Have you ever had anything go wrong on stage that you've had to recover from? And here, I mean, you know, either gear fails or brain fails, just, you know, anything like funny that you can tell us where you've had to recover or carry on or whatever.
Well, 3 spring to mind. The first one was my very first note on my very first public performance. I was in a band, I was 14, we were let in to play in a pub. All my family turned up, aunts, uncles, cousins, that sort of thing. And everyone else in the band was teenagers the same as I was. And so it was a big deal to us. You know, we'd been rehearsing in a local youth centre, and it was the first time we were going to perform in front of people. And I think we must have opened the set with Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams. And that starts with a snare drum hit, a flam, and I went bang, and the snares fell off the bottom of the drum, you know, like the string just broke. And, you know, I remember, I think my dad, you know, leapt up onto the stage and drum keys came out and we had to fix it and all that sort of thing. So, but I was, you know, I was nervous because it was my very first gig. So for that to be the first thing that happened, that was, I remember being that being challenging. But then there was another one that really springs to mind. I was playing the Paradiso in Amsterdam with an artist called Heather Nova, who's from Bermuda, and she's got quite a following in Europe. And she was doing like an acoustic tour. So I had like a broken down drum kit with a couple of congas, and I was playing shakers and moving around. But I also had an MPC that ran a couple of rhythm tracks, and also the click. And we got, you know, so there was a, rather than it wasn't a raucous rock gig, so there wasn't this sort of ambient noise of the audience. There was between songs, everyone was quite, you know, because it was quite delicate and singer-songwritery, so it was quite quiet. And then so we received the applause for this tune, and then we're going into the next one. And I reached over to the MP3 and hit play, and that was, and I knew it started with a conga part, and I hit play, and it counted me in, and that was like, that doesn't work. And you know, it was my counting kind of thing. And that's going, and I started it again, and like I could feel that the venue, I think it holds about 1,000 people, just silent looking at me, and I hit it again. And then so Heather turned around and looked at me, and I was like, why doesn't that pattern work with what I'm hearing? And I just looked at Heather and went, sorry, Heather. And she just turned around and fortunately just started the song, and which gave me a moment. She just, you know, start with the first verse, gave me a moment to look over, and I hadn't flicked the song on the MPC, so it was playing the song before it, which was a completely different tempo. But in the moment of panic, I didn't get that in my head. So it's like, right, okay, now what's going on? Then just joined in, and we just did the song as normal, and it was fine. So it wasn't horrendous, but that moment where you go, what's gone wrong? I don't know what's gone wrong. As, you know, I can just feel the blushing and the sweating. And then there was another occasion, we were playing Giant Stadium. We were doing Live Earth, which was similar to like Live Aid. I think it was about 2008. It was Giant Stadium in New York, with Katie Tunstall, and we were playing Black Horse and the Cherry Tree, one of her big songs, and myself and the keyboard player at the back of the stage, and there was a section in the song where it just sort of kind of goes down to bass drum, and because we've been touring and we were having fun, and that in that section I often just sort of kind of threw my stick in the air and chord it to then carry on, you know, just showing off, being an idiot. But you know, it was like big audience, the stadium wasn't full by any stretch of the imagination, but still a big gig, and it was being televised around the world and all that sort of thing. And we got to this section and I was laughing and joking with the bass player. We're both vibing on how excited we were to be there. And I threw this stick up and then just sort of watched it as it sailed backwards. I just thought of all the places not to pull it off, it was here. So yeah, you know, but that was my own fault, that one.
And that's one of those where I always say to people, make sure you've got plenty of spare sticks, because
yeah.
You know, I find people that, you know, maybe starting out with drums or whatever, that if they drop their stick, even in a performance, I've had it before where they go, oh, and they'll get up and they'll go to get the stick, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
Maybe it's rolled off the riser or something. You can't do that.
Absolutely.
And your second one as well, I've totally had that fairly recently. I've got the Roland SPDSX, and we loaded a load of new samples on, and I don't know how, because I checked it and I double checked it. I was on the right song. I started the backing track and I was like, that's not the right song. Hang on. Next pad, no. Oh my goodness. And by this point, the applause has stopped. Yeah, and like, and you feel like everyone's looking at you. It feels like 5 minutes, doesn't it? When actually it's 3 seconds, and you're like, and you're just sitting there like, I actually don't know what to do. Turn it off. Turn it back on. Oh yeah.
But because of that experience, because I use the same with Brian Ferry, and even though there aren't many loops in that running, we often work to click track. But the set list can change a lot. So whenever I'm working with that, every gig I check it twice before I leave the stage at the end of sound check. You know, I'm usually the last one on stage, just going through it, checking everything's right. So sometimes those experiences can inform you, like, right, you can't, you know, that you need to check this stuff, you know, you need to be on top of this, because if it goes wrong, it feels awful.
It does. And I've had so many problems with it when I've changed. When it's running and it's fine, but it was when you make a change, and I've had it before where I've loaded up too many samples and they go over, like, it accepts more than 100 or whatever, but then it starts to muck around and it can't find them, and then you have to renumber stuff, and then it mucks with the kit chain, and it's just so after sound check you're just sat there for half an hour like reprogramming. Anyway, so when you first get a gig with a new artist, how do you learn the material? So, you know, just for example, do you just get the Brian Ferry gig, so you just, okay, I'm going to go on Spotify and just listen to all of his stuff, and then, you know, I don't know which songs I'm going to get, but here we go. Or do you transcribe some of it, or are you sent a comprehensive list of things with maybe drum heavy mixes, or this one, are you ever sent a whole folder where it's got all of the drum music? Here you go, Luke, here's like literally all of the dots for you to play.
I've never had that. I've never had the dots sent to me, but I chart everything out. And I've always done that, because I've done part of it is you know, for me, if I'm learning a song and I memorize it, it'll go in, I'll do a tour, I might not play with that artist again, but I might come back to it. And it happened with Heather Nova. I charted all her stuff when I first did the first tour with her, and then, you know, she's had several drummers, and then I got called to go back on tour with her at some point, and I charted out all the music so I could pull those songs out again and pretty much work them out, you know, as I was going back, refreshing myself with the material. But what's been brilliant with Brian Ferry, so I've always done that. I've always charted it out, and I always find that you know, I can get through a song. I've charted it out, and once I've got through a song, that map has gone in there. You know, there's an element of, I know what's coming up next. I know what the fills are, what the pushes are, because it's almost like creating a map in my head of those symbols that I've written out, the musical notes and notation, and that some of that is retained. The tricky bits are kind of in there, mapped out, and I can see it and see where the pushes are and what the fills might be. Brian Ferry's been fascinating because he's got this encyclopedic knowledge of all his material. You know, he has 10 people on stage playing, and he can hear if the guitar sounds not quite right, or if one note's slightly out, or, you know, you're you know, like all the drums. And he, you know, he'll, in rehearsals or sound checks, he'll stop the band and go, oh, you're missing this, and you go, wow, how did you even hear that? So there's been it's been really good with him to be very detailed. You know, that there's this famous song Avalon, part of the Roxy Music kind of canon, and I was 3 years into playing that, and I had charted that out, and it's an amazing song. You know, I can't remember the name of the guy who played it originally, but it's a brilliantly arranged drum part for that song, and I charted it out for note for note and learned it. And 3 years into the gig, I got sent an MP3 going, on the third bar of the second verse, you're playing a bass drum that isn't there on the original. Do you mind taking that out for the next gig? And that's like, wow, that's amazing that you're even, you know, like focusing on that detail, which as a musician can be frustrating at times, but also brilliant because it pushes you to also look at that much detail. But also with him, because he's got such an amazing back catalogue and has had such amazing drummers, having played with him, what they've often done is sent me the track. They've gone back into the multi-track and they've put the drum track on the left and everything else on the right. So I've got MP3s of Andy Newmark's original part, Paul Thompson, Jerry Marotta, no, is it Jerry Marotta or his brother? I can't remember. Rick, I think Jerry and Rick Marotta both played on some Brian stuff. So all these incredible drummers, and I can hear exactly what they played in the studio because it's been isolated, and that's fascinating. You know, I've learned so much from Andy Newmark because there's certain intricacies and details that you miss in the mix, and there's things that Andy played where, like, when it's in with all the instrumentation, you go, how on earth is he doing that? I don't understand what the sticking is. But then to be able to isolate it and hear it, it's like, wow, right, okay, I get what he's doing there. He's doing a double before he does, you know, those kind of things, pulling them, and to have the experience of pulling apart an Andy Newmark original part is like just amazing. You know, it's like having a lesson with the guy. It's incredible. So that's been fantastic, and like I said, I've learned a lot from doing that, and learned a lot from working to that detail. But with other when I've not had the benefit of those multi-tracks, I can listen to a song, kind of pick out the part, and then I'll notate it and learn it. So I think one of you know, because I'm not the chopsiest guy in the world, but one of the things I think people rely on me for is to look at that detail and pick out the important, and even play it note for note to the original. It could, because having had the experience of recording some albums, you understand sometimes, you know, not all music, but a lot of the stuff I played on, the effort and detail that's gone into recording the song and structuring the drum part because it works, and getting the tempo right and those sort of things. And I don't think that should be any different for live. And like with Brian, often you'll go, we'll start at the original tempo and then go, oh, let's take it up for live, just to give it a little bit more energy and that sort of thing. But that level of detail and working on the songs like that can have a huge impact on the show. And it's a real education in understanding how music works and how time and the musical parts can influence the feel and the emotion that's put across with the track. Because there's some Brian tracks that we do even like 10 BPM quicker than the original, because of where they sit in the set. On the album, they worked at that tempo because of the songs around them. If you take that song and put it amongst other songs, it actually needs to be at a different tempo, or it comes at the end of the set when the energy's building. And all those things are really important from a musical point of view rather than just a drumming point of view. So I'm sort of fascinated by putting shows together and how songs relate to each other. So the parts and the time are both really, really important, and you need to sort of take, but you know, the importance of them is instrumental to the success of that song and where it sits in the set list.
So you think then that reading drum music is an important tool to have?
No, playing music from here is the most important thing, and there's amazing drummers that don't read. It can be a great tool to help you do stuff, you know. And I know you've spoken to Steve Barney. He's a good friend of mine, and he doesn't read, and he's never been drawn to reading. But you go and watch him play a show, and he's amazing. You don't think, oh, that guy's reading or not reading or anything like that. He plays the music, and it comes from the heart, and he communicates something that's appropriate to the song and can lift a show. Doesn't matter whether he can read or not. But having learned how to read, I use it as a tool to help me understand how the song works. It helps me, you know, like again with Brian, we can get a list of 20-25 songs to learn to start rehearsals for the next tour, and we might not play all of them, but going into the rehearsal with those charts and being able to make notes like, oh, we're dropping that verse, we're half in that chorus and that sort of thing. You don't have to hold everything in your head. Obviously you do by the time you get to the gig, but in rehearsal and learning the tune, you can have a visual cue of what needs to be done, what might have changed, rather than trying to hold it all in the head and making mistakes and frustrating people when you're rehearsing, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. It's an important tool to have if, you know, obviously, yes, not every drummer can read. You know, you look at like some of the great drummers that couldn't read. It's not the be all and end all, but it's if you've got the choice, it's quite a good thing to be able to do for, you know, rehearsals and so on.
I mean, I would encourage anyone who's learning drums to learn drum music, and that doesn't mean you have to sight read or anything like that. But if you understand the basics, it can be a really useful tool for your musicality.
Yeah, good stuff. So, on to my couple of curveball questions now. And, you know, if you've watched some of these interviews, Luke, you know where this is going. So the first one of those is, what are your hobbies away from drums?
Good question. I live on the coast now, on the North Norfolk coast. And although it's not famed for surf, I love surfing. And I'm not very good, but there's something about getting in the sea that just is just wonderful, and a great way to go and decompress, especially at the end of the tour or something like that. So I've got into that in the last few years, but I've always been a runner, and I find keeping fit for the type of gigs that I've done, keeping fit has been a huge bonus and benefit to my playing career. And also when I'm touring, it's a great way to see places, because you might have half an hour, something like that, and if you can go out and have a bit of a run, you can kind of get the lie of the land, where the venue might be, where your hotel is in relation to everything else, see a bit of where you're going, which you don't always get the opportunity to do. So running and yoga. I really enjoy yoga, just from and actually that I've done that on and off for the last 10-15 years, but with Brian I found that a great way, because sound checks would be quite lengthy, because there'd often be an opportunity to rehearse. So again, it's not just about getting the sound right and getting comfortable for the show, you're taking in new information, and it can be, you know, and that you need to digest that for the evening. And I found touring with Brian, of like after the sound check, before dinner, going and just decompressing with a bit of yoga is just a great way to focus on the body and switch off from the mind for a bit. And then in that time, you find that things, you know, everything just settles down, and I can generally walk on stage in a quite calm place, even though sound check might have been a bit fraught or a bit, you know, a bit challenging or whatever like that. It's a great opportunity to reset for the night, for the evening. So yeah, they're the things I enjoy.
Good stuff.
And my dog who's here.
Oh,
I enjoy it. Hang on, you're gonna have to come in there. I get to walk him twice a day.
Hello. Oh, awesome. And you kind of you said the wrong word earlier. You said drumming instead of running, I think. But
Yeah.
that kind of is something that's kind of why I made this question, because I think for all of us, drums can still very much be our hobby, and they started out as a hobby. You know, what you said about your first band and your Summer of '69 gig, that was your hobby then, and we're lucky. Obviously, I say lucky, we've worked hard, but you know, the drums pay the bills, so you know it can still be a
Absolutely.
hobby.
Yeah, and you know, I love drumming more now than ever, and it will always be part of me. And I've been lucky enough to make a career out of it. That may stop, and but it will remain my hobby. You know, and I still approach it as something as something I'm passionate about, rather than as a job. Do you know what I mean? And that's an incredibly fortunate position to be in. But it is still my hobby. I just happen to get paid for it. So drumming would be top of the list, you know. And I play pretty much every day.
Yeah, awesome. How does your dog find the drums? Does he care?
He hates it. He's got an aversion to the bottom end. So as soon as I hit the bass drum, he's out the door. He's gone.
So on to the most important question of this interview. We've had some really interesting answers on this one. So, what's your favourite biscuit?
Oh, I'm gonna have to go. I think a chocolate hobnob.
Yes.
I think that always delivers, and you know they've got a good crunch, but you've got the chocolate is just really, I don't know, indulgent. So I think if you're going to go for a biscuit, you want it to be a treat. I don't think that you know, when I have a biscuit, I don't want it to just to be, oh, I'll just shove one of these in my mouth. I want to get something out of it, and I think the chocolate hobnob always delivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you you know, would you ever dunk the chocolate hobnob?
No, I don't think I'd dunk the chocolate hobnob, because I think you'd lose some of the chocolate in the hot drink. I think it's more take a bite of the hobnob and then have a swig of the drink and then let it do its thing once.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be my take on it.
Seeing as we're talking about this biscuit, everyone that's brought this biscuit up, I've had to mention this. Are you a coffee or tea drinker, or both, or
both?
Okay.
Probably, yeah, both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you know Bob Knight?
I do, yes. I actually, that was one of the interviews I watched, because he's very entertaining. He's a funny man.
He's brilliant. And so if you watched it, then you may well have seen his like espresso hobnob combo. You make your little espresso, you get your chocolate hobnob upside down, so chocolate side down on the cup, leave it for a few minutes, and when you come back to it and take it off, you've got a ring of chocolate around your espresso cup.
What?
And honestly, I did not believe it until I tried it. The chocolate hobnob is like coffee infused. Like, you eat it and it tastes of coffee as well. It's incredible.
I didn't get that far in the interview, I've got to say, and now I'm regretting it. That is genius.
It is.
And I need to try that. That's a bit dangerous to know, because if that's as good as it sounds, there's no going back, is there?
No, it's good. I mean, it's messy, because obviously once you pick up the you know, the chocolate biscuit, it's all over your fingers. But you know, it's worth it. It's worth the mess.
Yeah.
So, from biscuits to my final question: if you could give just one bit of advice to up and coming drummers, people starting out learning the drums, what would that advice be?
It's the thing. I went to Drum Tech for a couple of years and did their full-time course. And the one piece of advice that really stayed with me, came from Bosco de Oliveira, who was the percussion teacher. And we had Latin percussion lessons. And the one thing that he said, and he said many great things, but the thing that really changed my philosophy of playing was, when you practice, but when you play. And what he was trying to, because he gave I think there was probably about 8 in my class, and we all had a different percussion instrument. And I think, you know, we were all given a chart with our little part on it, and we were all sitting there reading, you know, what the cowbell part was, what the cabassa part was, what the, you know, conga part was, and all kind of following this thing, making sure we're getting it right. And he's like, no, read that, get it in here, and then play. Listen to everyone else. Listen to what's going on. You shouldn't, you know, that's not the music. The music's here and comes out of here. And so we just, you know, we kind of learned the carve or whatever we were doing, and we all just looked at each other, played, communicated, and it revolutionized what we were doing. It sounded completely different. And I've always approached that. It's like, do your homework before you step into a rehearsal. You know, sit at the drums and practice what you want to practice. Be focused on what you want to practice. And then when you get into a situation where you're making music and creating with people, that should all be forgotten. You should get to a point where the song you've learned, the part you've learned, the thing that you've practiced should be in here and just come out, because it's going to sound musical and you're going to use it in the right place, in the right place in the music at the right time. It's not just going to be this random fill that you want to squeeze in somewhere. The fill's going to come, if you've learned it, the fill's going to come out in the right place, and it's going to sound musical, and everyone's going to respond to it, and you're going to, you know, lift the rest of the band hopefully with what you're doing, rather than thinking, what's that guy doing? Why is he putting that there? So it works on so many different levels, and it's stayed with me ever since, and I think it's a brilliant bit of advice.
Luke, thank you so much for spending your time with us here at DrumWise today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Likewise, Tom. Thanks for having me along.